Hi, welcome to the Windrush conversation panel. My name is Lee Jasper. I'm the Vice Chair of BAME Lawyers for Justice. I'd just like to wish you all a warm welcome from Shez Lee Jasper. And we're going to have a great debate tonight. We've got three expert panels, some of the finest minds in the country in relation to these issues concerning Windrush. And let's just remind ourselves about the issue. As the Windrush scandal broke in 2017, as the campaigning groups like Black Activists Rising Against the Cuts, solicitor organizations such as Jacqueline McKenzie's and many others began to notice a draconian application of the, in quotes, hostile environment policy by Theresa May. And that was leading to some bizarre, unjust and tragic decisions affecting our community. Largely known as the Windrush generation, having arrived in this country between 1948 and 1973, although they were British citizens legally by birthright, the 2014 and 2017 hostile immigration acts began to assert this draconian policy of detain and deport, putting an unbearable burden of proof on individuals to find documentation going back years. We all remember, don't we, that the Home Office destroyed the Windrush landing cards for those who disembarked from the Empire Windrush. This was Theresa May's hostile environment policy, and we've all seen, haven't we, the disastrous effects on a range of individuals right across the country. The panel is going to deep dive into all of this. Of course, in May 2018, Sajid Javid, the then Home Secretary, announced a review, and in March 2020, some 2 years later, Wendy Williams, independent advisor to Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary, produced her stunning Windrush Lessons Learned review, in which she ventilated, exposed, and went into great detail, explaining the culture that was predominant in the Home Office that led to so many people being so tragically affected by the Windrush scandal. By February 2020, although a compensation scheme had been announced, by February 2020, only 1,000 people had made claims, and those claims amounted to a paltry £62,000. There's a big hoo-ha and a lot of politicking, and eventually the government was forced to amend some aspects of that compensation bill. And the good news for you is that the deadline has been extended to April 2023. So you've still got lots of time to be able to make those claims. And the government trying to buy off campaigning groups and silence their ire and anger at their failure to provide compensation and the restitution for the damage done, announced £500,000 for community organisations to support individual victims and communities. There was a House of Lords debate on the 6th of May, and key issues were arose, such as the ownership of the scheme. Was it right for the Home Office, the very people who committed the crime, to be ownership of that scheme and oversee its implementation in terms of compensation? There was also the complicated application process, which many people believe has disinclined people to apply, not getting legal aid, relying on citizens' advice bureaus to give them advice. We've only seen a small number of applications. There's also the delay in payments. We've talked about 62,000, an incredibly small amount, spread over 1,000 people. Delays in payments were common. There were tariffs and caps on the payments. So you could only get a maximum amount in various categories of compensation, and those were all subject to debate. And then there was the issue of criminality. If you had a criminal record, the government initially insisted that they may not pay you any compensation. That was challenged and they rescinded somewhat, although they've said if you do have a criminal record, then they're likely to take some of your compensation back to pay the taxpayer. One doesn't understand the rationale there. Maybe we'll get into it. And finally, of course, the most scandalous part of the delayed in payment, some people died before they got their payments. Well, that's a summary of the Windrush issue and the scandal. My name's Lee Jasper, BME Lawyers for Justice. And as we begin to talk about these solemn and critical issues, this fundamental and most egregious attack on the human rights of African Caribbean people here in the United Kingdom, we're going to open with a contribution from my good friend and dear brother I've known for very many years. Many of you will know him. His name is David Nita. He's from the Society of Black Lawyers. He's one of Britain's foremost cultural spoken word poets. And David is joining me now to give a vocal recitation to bless our discussions here today with his poem called Vocal Essentials. David Nita, welcome to the program.
Yes, big respect, Lee. Thank you very much and welcome everybody to the program. Thanks for tuning in. I wrote a very short poem, a sonnet, this one. And just to also note, by way of background, I've got a 10-minute play on the Windrush scandal that's coming out, and also a poem, another poem on the Windrush that's floating around somewhere. You'll probably get that at some stage. But for now, I just wanted to just grace this session with vocal essential. The cicada, a simple insect, yet finds its voice. If you're anywhere in range, you will have no choice but to hear its outcry as it declares without fear, refusing silence or insignificance. The cicada is here. Then it fades away like all creatures do eventually. The sound is gone. There is a sense of tranquility. Yet in the emptiness of this new muted season, you still hear the echo of the cicada's existential reason. It found purpose in life, reproduced, and was vocal. The cicada arrested a presence so essential, and it will come again in the next cicada round to remind us once again our own purpose may yet be found. Inspired by the cicada, we must use our vocal essential. Speak up in the cause of justice. Your voices are all vital. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Vital from David Nita, knocking it out the park to start this. The information you need. Now we're going to open up with our first panel, which is an overview of the Windrush Lessons Learned Review by Wendy Williams, a very critical document. If you haven't read it, I urge you to do so. It's a revealing and damning indictment of the culture that gave rise to the Windrush scandal, and it gives a forensic examination of the issues and the dynamics that led to the grave injustices we now all sadly know too well. I'm going to be joined on the line by Jacqueline Mackenzie, solicitor, who's the Windrush solicitor, in my view, from the Centre of Migration Advice and Research, and her own firm, Mackenzie, Butte and Pope. And of course, she's the founder of Windrush Action. That's the group that's very much taking care of those who found themselves victims. Welcome, Jackie, We're also joined by Dr. Connie Solzy, solicitor and partner at Dayton, Pierce and Glynn. And if you read the High Court annuals as avidly as I do and Supreme Court decisions, then you know that this firm is very much involved in securing some fundamental human rights decisions on behalf of our community. We're also joined on the line by Lord Simon Woolley, and of course, a dear old friend of mine. We are co-founders of Operation Black Vote. He will be able to say more about that House of Lords debate that we had on the 6th of May 2020, where so many issues were arisen in terms of concern. And hopefully we're joined by Reverend Clive Foster. Reverend Clive Foster is director of the Nottingham Windrush Support Forum and the Pilgrim Church. I know the Pilgrim Church in Nottingham very well because I was best man at David Weaver's wedding, and his father was the founder of that church. So, Mr. Christian Weaver, I hope you're watching, sir, and your church continues to prosper well. Well, I can see on screen, I do have the two ladies, Connie and Jackie. I am not seeing Mr. Woolley, and I am not seeing Mr. Foster. So I'm not quite sure what happens, but ladies, I've got you, so I'm going to begin, if I may. And if I could start with you, Jacqueline, before coming to Connie. Now, you're one of the...
Sorry, Lee, do you mind taking it the other way around? We've just got a slight technical glitch here. I'm having to change over the computers. So if you just... if you start with Connie, I've just got to switch over computers. Sorry about that. I do apologise, Connie, if that's come up.
That's fine.
Okay, I'm just going to be switching.
Okay, Connie, lessons learned review, an important document, forensic examination of the issues. What was your take on the document and its conclusions?
So I focused actually on the Equality Act discussion in the report, and that's what I'd like to talk about tonight, if I may. Just by way of introduction, I work on judicial review and discrimination claims, and it's the Equality Act discrimination claims that I wish to discuss tonight, and some of the recommendations that the report makes, which I believe will be problematic where certain fundamentals are not properly addressed. Just to go straight into it, the report finds quite shockingly that there was an implicit assumption at both junior and senior levels of the Home Office that duties under the Equality Act did not actually apply on an operational level. In other words, these decision makers, who are agents of a public body, consider that their day-to-day work did not come within the remit of the Equality Act, which of course cannot be right, particularly when you read what Section 149 of that Act says. That Act requires that public bodies, including the Home Office, have regard or due regard to elimination of discrimination and victimization, amongst other things, when carrying out their functions. In essence, therefore, when implementing policies or formulating legislation, this duty is supposed to be paramount, and the Home Office is not accepted from it. Ms. Williams found that the Equality Act assessments, the purpose of which are to help public authorities understand the relevance and effect of intended policies on diverse communities, and seems to me would have informed the Home Office decision-making, was scrapped by the Conservative government in 2012. Fundamentally, she also finds that there was insufficient care or concern to identify the policy consequences of the 2014 and 2016 Immigration Act. And those familiar with these acts will know that it is the framework that introduced the concept of disqualified persons. That is those people who are treated as not having lawful status in the UK. And the Act said that those people should be denied the right to rent, the opening up of bank accounts, driving licenses, and it also introduced the charging for NHS treatment. I actually think that the problem goes further back to the 2012 Act, as you touched on, Lee, at the beginning, which restricted legal aid for immigration cases, which of course would have prevented those in the community from seeking and or obtaining advice. Anyhow, the report finds that quite, I think, shockingly, that or maybe not shockingly, that the Windrush generation did not feature in the minds of those developing hostile environment measures. I think I need to repeat that. The Windrush generation did not feature in the minds of those developing hostile environment measures. And I think that's quite shocking, actually. And I guess a good finding in the report. As a result, the report also finds that so many people who saw the UK as their home were not properly recognized or protected. In view of those findings, her recommendations include the following, some of which appear in my mind to be unattainable in the current climate. Number one, she says that there should be an acknowledgement by the government that serious harm was inflicted on people who are British. I think the problem with this is that the government does not necessarily see some Windrush migrants as British and is not treating them as such. B, the report recommends that there should be an unqualified apology by the government, the efficacy of which will be determined by the Home Office demonstrating that they have learned from their mistakes and evidenced by a change in their culture and their way of working. 3, she finds that in addition to the compensation scheme that was introduced last year, that the government should help those who have been adversely impacted come to terms with their experiences and should go further in righting wrongs. She therefore recommends a government-run program of reconciliation events with members of the Windrush generation to enable those who have been affected to be able to articulate their experiences in the presence of trained facilitators, senior Home Office officials, ministers, so that they can reflect on their experiences. In relation to these last 2 recommendations, I make the following observations. Number 1 is, I believe that to have a proper reconciliation process, you must first start with a compensation process that is operated in a fair and just manner. By this, I mean that the process should not perpetuate what victims have gone through by failing to properly weigh up their pain and suffering. The fact is, communities and individuals are unlikely to engage in reconciliation events, show up in a room and talk about their experiences where there continues to be injustice. Secondly, I say that specifically in respect of the Equality Act violations that the report identifies, there seems to me, and maybe I'll be corrected by those in the second panel, that there is no specific category for those wishing to make an Equality Act claim to do so under the current compensation scheme. I appreciate that the formulation of the scheme preceded the report. Nonetheless, I think that in light of the report findings on Equality Act breaches, if the compensation scheme is to be said to be fair, the Home Office should seriously consider revising the scheme to allow for those claims to be made, and secondly, to offer adequate compensation awards. However, based on my experience with the Home Office, I fear that they won't do that, because to do that would actually require them to admit that at the very least there was indirect discrimination or indirect racial discrimination in their operations. But I think that if they were to do that, it would hopefully prevent many from going through similar experiences in the future. Thank you.
Well, Connie, thanks for that very concise and very clear analysis of the Windrush Lessons Learned Review report. And I want to know if I could go to Jacqueline McKenzie. I introduced previously. Jacqueline, you've been following these issues line, dot, and comma from the very beginning. What was your analysis and take and review on the Windrush Lesson Learn Review?
Good evening, Lee, and our guests online. I think Dr. Connie said it all, really. But just to give some background, I've been working on what I would call Windrush issues now for about 15 years. We first saw the issue of people coming to us as lawyers who specialize in immigration asylum law without any status, having to pay lots of money to either naturalize or get what was called time limit stamps. And none of us then understood it. in the context of the Windrush generation. We just thought that this was a very, very unfair position, that people who came to the country, we hadn't even nuanced the fact that, you know, various bits of legislation had stripped them of their status as a consequence of their independence of their countries and so on. We just thought these are people who were born under, you know, the British flag, so to speak. Their journeys to the UK was virtually no different from somebody coming from Liverpool to London, or certainly in their opinion, that was their view. And all of a sudden we found that people were having to spend thousands of pounds to naturalise, or less so, to get something called a no time limit stamp as proof of their right to be in the UK. And in 2015 and 2016, I ran an immigration law training seminar for the CARICOM High Commissioners, that's the High Commissioners who represent various Caribbean countries. And we raised this, and one of them undertook to try and raise it with the Home Office, but I think they were probably ignored because their remit comes under the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. So we've certainly seen this as a major problem for a number of years, but fortunately the media picked up on it and it came to fruition. We're now almost 2 years after the scandal became live, and in the context of, or became known, I'd say, to people, but in the context of the lessons learned, we have a fantastic report as a result of an incredible amount of work done by Wendy Williams to get to a publication of the lessons from her review, i.e. the Windrush Lessons Learned report. But the lessons are also outside of that. And, you know, I mean, the recommendations I'll come to in a minute. I know I've only got a few more minutes, but the lessons for me are really in the context of what we're seeing now. I mean, just today, we had this, and I know the other panels are going to talk about the impact of COVID-19 disproportionately on the African Caribbean community in the UK. But it's very relevant to the lessons learned, because what we find, if we go back to the start of the Windrush generation, I know African Caribbean people were here from the Roman times, so I'm talking about the general mass migration from the 1948 era onwards. And we look at how this community has been treated and how this community has fared, you know, in many respects, and using most measures or most indices that are used to measure deprivation, our community is languishing near the bottom, whether it's health or whether it's housing or economic development. We are seeing this education attainment. So we all know individuals in our own cohorts might be people who are excelling, but that is not reflective across the society at all. Racism is still endemic in this society. And what we find that on top of all of that, you've got the hostile environment. So you can't get a job, and you can't get on at school, and you can't get housing, or you've got a good job and some racists in there don't like the look of you, and all of those sorts of things are happening. We've got the awful racism in the criminal justice system and lots of studies about that. And then you've got a department that's set out to be deliberately hostile. And given that the consequences of that deliberate act affect people who look like me more than it affects anybody else, then we have to say that's racism. Now, I think the report, the Lessons Learned Review report, is an excellent report. It gives us a lot of ground to go forward. We can each take a recommendation and do something with it. There's an enormous amount of work to do. But I think we will have lots of reviews as to what went wrong, and we will find that racism is definitely at the heart of it. And I think that the author of the report, Wendy Williams, who worked in an independent capacity, went quite far in finding that although the Home Office themselves weren't institutionally racist, that there were elements in some of the attributes of that work that clearly were. And in my mind, that's the opening for others to take and build on, whether it's through a public inquiry, whether it's through academic research or more reports. We need to fully understand it. And the reason for that is because we're not seeing this just in the context of Windrush, or in the context of how is it that this community, starting with those people who came off those rickety boats in the 1940s, are languishing where they are, but we're also seeing it in almost every aspect of what the Home Office does. So you've got the criminal justice system on the one hand, and we've got immigration. So we're still seeing the mass deportations of people who've lived most of their lives in the UK. Just today, the Home Secretary lost a case in the High Court around the deprivation of benefits, the no recourse to public funds to migrants in this country. There is no rationale for that policy, and particularly in the current context, where we know that that policy is causing incredible hardships on people. We see it in the awful rules that mean husbands and wives and partners are separated because of the minimum income requirement imposed upon people to bring their partners to the UK. We see awful things happening in terms of nationality law as it affects children around good character requirements, the fees, the immigration health surcharge fee. I mean, just this month, there's the big debate about it and the effect of it. When we discovered, I mean, I knew that, but a lot of people didn't know that nurses and doctors in our NHS, some of the very people who are dying whilst trying to prevent the spread of COVID-19 and keep under control this pandemic as it affects the UK, we found that they were having to pay the immigration health surcharge themselves. So there is so much that is wrong in that department, and it is cultural. So all of the recommendations will require a cultural shift in the thinking of how that department works, how it perceives a generation of people, particularly people from the African and Caribbean community, but other people suffer. We're seeing problems with the EU citizens with settled status scheme post-Brexit. So, you know, there are major problems and other communities suffer too, but I think it is absolutely clear to say that this community is suffering disproportionately. And I know I've got to round up in a bit, but I think we should look at one of the sentences in the recommendations. Ministers, on behalf of the department, should admit that serious harm was inflicted on people who are British. You can't get more damning than that. You don't need to attach any ism to that. This is an independent advisor. It's not like me, an immigration lawyer waving placards here and there and making a lot of noise and being a general nuisance. This is a senior civil servant who operated in an independent capacity, who had a team with her from various walks of life, and I was part of that team. She had a Home Office team working with her, and she made this recommendation. Serious harm. I cannot think of anything that has happened in the society for a very long time that's being described as serious harm. And, you know, are we going to see? We've got these 30 wonderful recommendations in this great book here, and it's all online, and I recommend that people read it. The Home Secretary has some things to do. We don't think those things are going to happen in the time frame. They've got to come back with a comprehensive plan within 6 months. I think Wendy Williams herself has said that she might revisit with another report within about 18 months. I think it's going to be justifiable if those deadlines slip. But what will not be justifiable is if we don't start to see that work beginning. COVID-19 is not going to be an excuse to see this work not start. So, for instance, we have the compensation scheme. A lot of us were very critical of it. It can work. I think the problems with the compensation scheme are that it isn't a redress scheme. And so there's lots of people who aren't going to be able to evidence any loss and aren't going to therefore be able to qualify. And that's one of the reasons why the figures are so low. It's also one or the applicants, the numbers of applicants are so low rather. It's also there's the issue about what support are people really getting to make viable claims. So that's a problem, and that's something that needs to be addressed. But we're also seeing, and I think Lee touched on it, the issue with criminal convictions not being acknowledged as being British citizens, because that's what's happening. No one's actually accepting that you are one, but you're getting a free naturalization, so to speak. But people, criminal convictions are being affected. I haven't yet seen the results of anybody applying for compensation as a criminal conviction and what might happen there. But I suspect that, you know, there may be some litigation arising out of some of that. One of my bugbears with the task force, because I totally acknowledge, you know, that there are some good things happening, but one of the things that I acknowledge that is a real bugbear for me is the operation of the vulnerable persons team. You know, by deliberate policy and deliberate action, the Home Office have put people into very difficult situations, very difficult circumstances. People are destitute. You know, I have a person who's still, you know, he was sleeping on the street. In fact, he was sleeping at Heathrow Airport. Just today, he's been housed purely under public health policy, not under any other policy. But where he's been housed is so uninhabitable that he's currently sleeping in a wheelchair. And so we've got the most awful things going on. And somebody said to me, and it was somebody in the Home Office actually, who said to me, don't understand why the Home Office is managing this. Why wasn't it given to one of the big charitable organizations? You know, when people got off those planes and arrived back in the UK, having been wrongfully removed or deported, why weren't they handed over to an organization, either a community organization, one of the big charities, and said, look, we are going to look after you. The Home Office is trying to do this, but it has a culture of the sort that has inflicted serious harm. So it is not best place to either deal with redress or try and unstick this serious harm and do right. It also has a policy, you know, and I kind of accept that the Home Office has a difficult job to do. It has to protect the nation's borders, you know. And as a result of trying to do all of that, it's going to have to make decisions and take measures that some of us who might be more border minded might not like. I totally accept all of that. But at a very grassroots day-to-day level, we're seeing decisions that are being made that are unconscionable and do not need to be made. In fact, yesterday there was a massive row because there was a letter produced by the president of the First Tier Tribunal in which he was replying to a letter from a senior civil servant in the House Office, where it was absolutely in the Home Office, where it was absolutely clear that what they were trying to do in their letter, it was about bail, and they were querying, you know, why so many people were being granted immigration bail, and it was a clear attempt, in my mind, to influence the judiciary. So we still have many problems. So despite the fact, and I understand, and Martin Ford QC might talk about this in his bit, that, you know, we're going to see better things happening around the compensation, more offers are going to be made. You know, the figures at the moment are woefully low. People going through the vulnerable persons unit are woefully low. We know that just, I think, around 10,000 people have been given status documents, and the Home Office's own data obtained from the Office for National Statistics suggests that should be around 50,000 people. And I think that's because people still fear. They've all had a relative or a friend or know of somebody, or read in the media of somebody who's been detained, deported, removed, and people who have died. And so therefore they're very frightened to come, you know, forward. And there's been no resources put into the community, or very little resources, to really go out there and do the outreach and find people, we all know where they are, and get them to come forward and avail themselves of these status documents, and then have a look and see whether they can make any applications for compensation. So in finishing, because I'm sure I've gone over my time and I can go on for hours, the recommendations are what they are. The issue is going to be the culture of the place, and whether or not it's going to be possible to have continuous scrutiny of an organization. I mean, I look around the Home Office, I don't see many senior officials of African Caribbean heritage or background, for instance. I've had lots of meetings with the Windrush task force, and I know that there are individuals in there who are trying to resolve this, and are trying to do a good job. And I don't know them personally, so I don't want to, besmirch their character. But I think it's almost impossible to do that job if you're working in a silo without any African Caribbean expertise around you, because there are cultural nuances which have caused the Windrush scandal and which must impact on how these recommendations, these brilliant recommendations, and more recommendations which will come, how they're going to be implemented. And my final point, just in case I don't get a chance to come back, I think Lee's going to mute me permanently after this. My final point, in terms of the lessons learned, it's a lessons learned for the community, because I've given lots and lots of talks about Windrush all over the place, schools, universities, outside Downing Street, in the market square, and in town halls, all around the place. I've been speaking about the Windrush scandal for the past 2 years, since it first came to light in the media, mainly as a result of the work that Amelia Gentleman did in The Guardian. And one of the things people always say to me, do I think it was a deliberate act? It's deliberate because these institutions themselves are inherently racist. I'm not saying the individuals are, but the institutions are. That's how they're built. That's how the UK was built. It's excursions into Africa and Asia and the Caribbean and plundering its wealth. That's how these organizations are built. So it trickles down to today. But I don't think somebody sat in a room and said, look, we're going to, destroy this community through these bits of legislation. Nobody knew, the community didn't know about these bits of legislation, so they were certainly problematic, but I don't think it was a deliberate act. But what I do think they did know, once the scandal broke, I think they knew that this is not a community that has any representation. Where is its leaders? Where is its organizations? Where's its money? Where's its socioeconomics? It doesn't exist. And so we're going to take the liberties, because what we're seeing, and that's an important lesson learned, that this community needs to build itself. It needs to fight. It needs to gain the strength to do that. People need to stop worrying about, oh, well, I've got this job. I can't be seen to be saying this, or I get funding from here, so I mustn't shout to you, as somebody has said to me. We've got to put all of that aside. This is a battle, and we've got to fight it. And we will only win it if we are going to be brave and courageous, because our people are suffering. And I think I've probably seen more of the Windrush victims than anybody else. I've seen over 1,000 people myself. That does include family members, mind you, and relatives and people. So it's not all of them. Probably about 300 of them are people with them, who are actually directly affected. But that is a large cohort of people, and they're not represented by our community. Nobody else is going to represent us. We have got to represent ourselves. And I think that is a lesson that we must learn, that we don't expect to see in a publication, but it is inherent in that publication. Thank you.
Well, fighting words there from Jackie, much of which I agree. I think there is an insipid culture within the Home Office. I know Lord Simon Woolley's got to go, and I know everybody's waiting patiently. I'm not sure whether we'll have time for Q&As. We'll see at the end, because time is ticking away. If I could bring in my good friend there, Lord Simon Woolley. There was a debate on the 6th of May in the House of Lords. I've read the debate papers, and even though the government made the apologies, made a commitment to putting things right, what was revealed in that debate is catastrophic errors, failure to deliver, and ranking competence, in my view. Lord Simon, great to have you. What is your take on the lessons learned review?
Yeah. Well, I do apologise because my internet is shocking at the moment, and I hope that you can hear me. First of all, it's great to be on this very important discussion that has moved people to tears and anger and frustration. And I was able to read the Hansard of the debate on the 6th and spoken to a number of people. And yesterday, in particular, I had a long meeting with Home Office officials. I asked for a meeting and they afforded me that. And I think it's very interesting. I mean, look, it is shameful what has occurred. It is shameful that people are still in pain and still waiting for compensations. But I do think that we need to keep the pressure on. My conversation with the Home Office yesterday was to look at some of those critical elements that a lot of your guests have exposed. in particular, the hostile environment in which, from top to bottom and in the middle, there was a mindset that within the Home Office that everybody hates us, so we just need to get on and do what we do and take the flak. Now, of course, because of that in many instances, the Home Office were looking at numbers and not human beings. And as such, we were treated, well, less than human, inhuman. And I think that message is beginning to get through. What they're telling me now is that they've brought new people in who have not been part of that bunker mentality. And they're slowly beginning to have a conversation about how things can dramatically change. My starting point to them was this: nothing will change unless you are honest enough to recognize a number of things. One is the hurt, one is the continued pain, and that the transformation within the Home Office will have to be root and branch. Now, the officials said to me, they're all ears, they're listening and blah, blah, blah. The question is, my biggest worry is, how much will that filter to the very top? Because we know from our present Home Secretary that we've heard some things that are worrying, right? That are troubling, with the rhetoric of zero tolerance, let's ramp up more stop and search, which is the very attitude that got the Home Office into the mess in the first place. So there's a bit of a tension there. There's a tension that this is a very honest report. It's hard hitting. It looks to fundamental changes. The way, the mindset, the hostile environment, the lack of impact assessments. You have a policy, but there's no impact assessment to tell you whether it's going well or not. And if you don't do that, then you carry on doing the same thing in the erroneous way. Within the report, there's a call for a minister for Windrush, a minister for immigration that looks at these elements. Whether or not we'll get that remains to be seen. And of course, the compensation is still woefully not being complete. I do think there's a window. I think there's a window, at least with the officials. I said to them, look, I've been working with officials in other departments, and Lee, you'll remember when we did it with the communities and local government, and we took them to communities and they listened to the stories, they listened to those on the front line. And together, Lee, we got a transformative change within that department because we bridged community to governance. I've suggested to the Home Office that they need to engage in a similar exercise that keeps our people at the heart of government, at the heart of change. If the Home Office is to have this transformative change, which some people say that they want, then we've got to take them on a journey. Now, to be honest with you, I don't know whether that's talk to me because they want me to not give them a hard time, or whether it's real. I think, Lee, we'll have to test it. We'll have to test their resolve. The other key factors, of course, this has been a traumatizing element, particularly for those that have been acutely involved, but actually too for the whole of the British, Caribbean, and African community. To see our people dying lonely, dying without hope, has been a traumatic incident. And I think that we're going to need, in that healing process, I was speaking to our mutual friend Dave Weaver, he's chair of the National Psychiatry, and he said to me that we need a healing process from A to Z as part of the Windrush reconciliation. I think is right. I hope that all the Windrush activists, and I would also argue this about the Windrush activist, without the activist that lobbied, that jeered outside Downing Street, I don't think that we would have got the change that we've gotten. To this government and previous governments and any other government, you have to have direct action, 100%. But we've got to keep our foot on the gas, both from the House of Lords, both from the community activists up and down the country. We've got to sow a golden thread that brings us all together. Sometimes we'll have different roles, I get that, but as long as that thread's there, we know what we're doing from A to Z. And I hope in the weeks ahead, I'm happy to take a delegation to the Home Office to meet the Home Office officials. I'm happy to take a delegation into the House of Lords when we can get back into the House of Lords. And I'm also happy to host those activists that you would know better than mostly, to come to a place where we can work out our game plan. I'm going to go off piece a little bit because I think it's important. The Windrush focus needs to be on point. But parallel to the Windrush track is COVID-19 and the devastating impact on Black and minority ethnic communities. My biggest worry is with COVID-19, unless we have a social and race equality contract that's able to lay bare the truths, what will happen is we won't be able to deal with the Windrush reconciliation as we will, because people are blown off track. And equally with COVID-19, that unless we are part of that debate, then it will go off into a direction that I would argue they'll be blaming us for dying. They will be blaming us for being poor. They will be blaming us for being on the first to be on the unemployment list. So I'm mindful that we're drawn into two different places. We have to intersect them both and speak with a collective voice on these two critical issues. I think we have enough good people in that space, but I hope that our communities will not be divided and ruled. I'm seeing this already with COVID-19. The carrot's being dangled. If you go on with this track that blames our communities, you might get close to so-and-so. You know the drill, Lee. You've heard this all before, seen it all before. Right now, more than ever, in our community's biggest crisis, bearing in mind now we're dealing with Windrush, we're dealing with COVID-19, we're dealing with all the other stuff. Unless we can stay united, we're in real trouble. I know that you've got a lot more guests there. Thank you for giving me my 5 minutes plus, and I hope that we can continue the conversation.
Thank you, Simon. Again, concise and insightful contribution. I'm going to bring in our good Dr. Clive Foster, who's been waiting very patiently from Nottingham, pastor of the Pilgrim Church, a church I know very well, having taken the Reverend Jesse Jackson there on a number of occasions, and actually gone to a number of sermons there by the former pastor, Mr. Christian Weaver. So, Mr. Fraser from Nottingham, glad to have you on board. Give us, from what you've heard, what was your take on the Windrush Lessons Learned review?
Well, thank you very much, Lee, and it's a pleasure to be on your program today. And thank you very much also for the contributions that have taken place. Well, with regards to the Windrush Lessons review report, I think it's a very strong report, as was said earlier. I think it's a very detailed report, 30 recommendations. I do believe that there is a substantive amount here whereby it can act as a catalyst, as a lightning rod, to start to bring about and see the change that we want to see within the Home Office, and to bring about that justice and bring back the humanity and dignity with regards to immigration policies and the way that the Windrush generation have been treated. So I welcome the report and its recommendations. You know, in Nottingham, when the Windrush scandal broke, and I always have to preface this when we say, what is a scandal? A scandal is any event or action which is both morally and legally wrong and causes a public outrage. My concern is that we may lose this outrage because it is a scandal beyond proportions as what has happened, that we have British citizens who have been treated in this way. So the report deals with many things. And back in Nottingham, when we responded to the crisis, there were two things when we started our drop-in surgeries, two things that quickly came to the fore that we had to rapidly respond with and work with. Number one was dealing with the legal requirements that people had to get themselves sorted out. And our two previous guests, the lawyers, spoke very eloquently about how to deal with that. In Nottingham, we had support from a legal expert, and Kundo Joel Matsiko from First Call Immigration. He partnered with the church. And we had also later to do with compensation, another legal person who worked in United Legal Access. And we saw the importance, because there was just no legal support for people when the scandal first broke, and they needed that legal support. So it's really important that we do look at the law and look at how we can actually be having more robust, accessible legal support for people. The second thing, in which I want to major on, was that we recognized that people were experiencing psychological and emotional damage. The hurt and the humiliation that has been caused, people who had the moral and legal right to be here, and then to be told that you were not British, and to go through all that pain and humiliation. So that was the second thing that we were dealing with. And the report tackles this in a number of ways. So we had to provide this pastoral support to help people transition and bring that sense of dignity and respect. Now, it's very interesting that one of the recommendations of the report speaks about the importance of reconciliation, making an apology, but not just making an apology, but for the Home Office and for officials and for an opportunity for people to tell their stories and to share their pain. This is very important, not only because we want the officials and the Home Office to hear this, but also it's important for our people as well to be telling and sharing their story and their pain. And it goes alongside what I heard earlier about the healing process. And I was very pleased that Simon Woolley mentioned about David Weaver, the president of the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy, because he mentioned something which, and I quote, which I agree very much with him when he says, you know, the government needs to recognise that the anger, tragedy and despair caused by this unprecedented and gross violation of Black British citizens is against their human rights. So I think the report, yes, it deals with a lot of the processes. Yes, it deals with a lot of the procedures that needs to be tackled within the Home Office. But one of the things that the report talks about is that policymakers and the officials, they lost sight of the people who they were there to serve and protect. So I'd be very keen to see one of the areas of the report which talks about how the reconciliation process and the opportunity for people to tell their stories. Because one of the cases that we supported in Nottingham was a lady by the name of Veronica Bell, who went to Jamaica with her father. And back in 2001, when she wanted to come back with her father, they did not allow her father to come back. And he couldn't get back into the UK. He had to go back to Jamaica. And sadly, he passed away with prostate cancer. And he had the right, we now know, to have been in the country. So these stories are very powerful. I just want to end by saying that as well, that I have nothing but the utmost praise for the Windrush generation. I think that, Jacqueline mentioned it earlier, the people who came forward, stepped up, told their story. These are the people who built the NHS. They worked in the factories. They worked in the mines. They worked in the transport services. and then to have the indignity to be told that they're not British. And I can't stop but applaud their courage. Now it's time for this generation and the generations behind us to be unswerving, unrelenting, and undaunted in taking up the challenge now to ensure that there is justice for the Windrush generation.
Well, thank you very much. I think everybody will agree we had a great panel on that session. I would take questions and answers, but we're now running so late that it would be unfair to others in the following panels so to do. So I'm going to wish you adieu, my panelists. So you've been made an amazing contribution. And just let's say to everybody, look, we're going to be doing Windrush updates once a month, because we think we need quality discussions like this at least once every month, so that we can keep the whole movement appraised of what we're doing, what we're seeking to do, who's doing what, and what new developments are taking place. So can I thank you all? Good night, and enjoy your evening. And I'm going to move on now, if I may, to the next panel, which is towards just compensation and redress. Can I just say, before I bring in that panel, that, look, I think that it's time for direct action and civil disobedience. I really do. I hear the conversations about changing cultures. I hear the conversations about putting policy in place. I hear the conversations about appealing to the better angels of their nature. But I know that justice is never given, that you have to secure justice. And the way to secure that is by the most powerful exertion of your human rights. And the way to do that is to bring about civil and social political change by having non-violent, civil disobedient, direct action, such as we did outside 10 Downing Street, that brought the whole of the West End to a halt, and then on Windrush Day of Action, where we locked off Westminster Bridge for 1 hour. We locked off every town centre where we had black majorities in this country. We get very much more attention and traction from those in power at number 10 Downing Street. But bringing in our next panel, we're delighted to be able to have Martin Ford QC. He's a barrister. He was the advisor to the Windrush compensation scheme, looking very lockdown Friday there, Martin. It's a Ford thing. Delighted to have you. We're also joined by Professor Jeffrey Palmer, DSc, Emeritus Professor and Jamaica High Consul to Scotland. And if you haven't read Professor Palmer's book, I would urge you to.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Hold on, Professor. I'll bring you in shortly.
Great.
A fantastic
Brilliant
insight. His book, his inventions, and his contribution to science. We're also joined by Dawn Hill, CBE. She's the chair of the Black Cultural Archives, an institution I know very well from many, many moons.
Hi, Dawn.
I'm delighted to support the development of the Black Cultural Archives by making sure Ken Livingston signed a very large check way back when I was in the office. And we're joined by Councillor Carlton Young, who's the chair of the Croydon Afro-Caribbean Family Organisation, again an individual who has been supportive with Windrush Action and has been intimately involved in the lives of those who've found themselves on the wrong side of a British immigration system that so woefully let them down. Delighted you could all join us. The title of our panel is Towards a Just Compensation and Redress. Martin Ford QC, you were instrumental in advising government about what that redress should be. And we've heard at the House of Lords debating on the 6th of May that there still remains some very serious concerns in the extent to which compensation and the process of redress and restitution have been effectively and meaningfully implemented for the victims. Delighted you could join us. Tell us your thoughts and concerns.
Yeah. Very, very happy to. This is a subject very dear to my heart. My father passed away in February, aged nearly 89. He came here in 1953. did 2 years national service, and thought he was British. He was born in 1931 in Barbados. In 1973, he applied for naturalised status because he was made to as a result of the 1971 Immigration Act. That was where I think things began to go very seriously wrong as a matter of law. I found, going through some of his belongings the other day, the letter that he received from the Home Office in 1973 when he applied, which advised him that he and my mother, who'd come here in '55, had applied for naturalisation, but that his best course of action was to apply to the Barbados High Commission. My brother and I were born here, and despite the fact that we were automatically entitled to British citizenship, and they'd applied for us to be citizens or to get a British passport, that they would hold our applications in abeyance, and we had an absolutely automatic right until my parents decided if they were going to opt for their island of origin passports. So I think even then the culture was to try and dissuade people from pursuing their rights. And I read that letter with horror, and I wondered whether they were actually trying to say to my parents, you're not welcome. You've done your 20 years, in my dad's case, of paying national insurance and tax. You've done your bit for Queen and Country, national service. Now you've got these two boys. We'd quite like to back. And I do look at the compensation scheme against that background. I mean, I'm delighted that you're hosting this event, and it's really good that we've now got a powerful network, I think, of people. I've met most of the people who've spoken so far, which we didn't have before. We were easy to pick off because we were very disparate. And I hope that if there's a legacy that comes out of this scandal, it will be that we will never allow ourselves to be attacked in this way as a community again. I feel that the emphasis is still too strongly against the Home Office. This is a political problem. Looking back at the history, I'm not an immigration lawyer, but I've had to immerse myself in the history of the legislation. The 1971 Act, which effectively deprived those who'd been born under a British flag of automatic citizenship, was introduced by a Labour government in 1968 by Jim Callaghan. The deportation flights were increased in 2007 by John Reid, another Labour Home Secretary. And I have wondered aloud, do we have a political party which actually represents us as a cohort of people? And I really have my doubts. Around compensation, the issues that I'm still battling over with the Home Office are around support for making claims. I initially wanted legal aid. I still think that's the way forward. I'm thoroughly depressed that there are people who claim to be human rights lawyers offering their services to people who are entitled to compensation, including, I know myself, the family of a deceased claimant, and thankfully I did manage to persuade the Home Office that claims should be inherited, and they want to take 30% of a dead man's compensation entitlement as their fee. And we need to nip this in the bud. We need a cohort of bright, talented black lawyers, because there are plenty of. If we can't get legal aid for claimants, then we need to unite to provide that service for our elders and for those who have suffered. The other issue I've had with the Home Office has been around criminality. I made it very clear that the amount of compensation payable to people should not be influenced by past criminality. That found its way into the scheme. It was not consulted upon, and I think it would be unsustainable as a matter of law if that were challenged, and I'm waiting for somebody to challenge that aspect of it. And I basically said to the Home Secretary at the time, for me, this is a resignation issue. Unless I'm allowed to publicly proclaim the fact that you disregarded my advice. And he, after 2 weeks, came back to me and said, yes, you are allowed to tell people I disregarded your advice. So that gives you some idea of what's happening at the political level. The Home Office civil servants, in the main, and I do understand that they have a discretion over policy, but in the main are doing the bidding of their political masters. And it's a political process, I think, that we need to get more involved in. I do not understand how a party, the major parties, could stand by and allow reforms to our laws, which mean that if I had come here as a 5-year-old, committed a crime at 35, and been convicted, and with 3 children, let's say under the age of 7, sentenced to a period of imprisonment of greater than 12 months, and deported as a foreign national offender to the country of my birth. As far as I'm concerned, that person is a criminal. But that is the law, and the law is made by Parliament, and that is why I say that we need to get more involved in the political process. There are lots of things on the statute that I fundamentally disagree with. Compensation scheme itself has been thoroughly misrepresented in the press, I'm afraid, but that's partly because the Home Office ability to communicate again seems poor. £62,000 paid in December, a huge outcry. Isn't that pitiful? No, it wasn't, because to be frank, the scheme was announced in April of 2019, and there was no infrastructure in place. There was political pressure to announce that something was being done, but there was nobody to do it. And the people that were eventually employed as caseworkers, some 60 odd, who needed an office, who needed IT, were not properly in place until about November of last year. So it's hardly surprising that the initial payments were small. The other thing about those payments is that most of them were interim payments, by which I mean they were payments of easy bits to calculate. So, for instance, fees that people needed refunded. The complicated stuff, loss of earnings, emotional impact on individuals of having their rights denied, that is being worked through now. And I can assure you that there are claims pending which will exceed 6 figures. The scheme as a scheme, I hope, will turn out to be fair and just, but it's the implementation that's important. And that's why I'm trying to keep an eye on what the Home Office are doing, because I think one of the issues is this rather rigid approach to rules and regulations and documents. And I have implored them not to place reliance on documents, not to make the scheme overly complicated, because in a sense, putting the onus upon people to produce documents is how we got into this mess. And I feel very strongly, and it's a difficult thing, I think, for such an institution to accept culturally, that the claimant's claims need, to a large extent, to be taken on trust. And I'll give you an example of why I say that. Let us say you have a claim for your out-of-pocket expenses as a close family member, so not just the person who may have been reporting for immigration bail, who would have a compensation claim. But if I was driving my family relative once a fortnight to report for bail, I'd be entitled to the depreciation on my car, the petrol that I paid, etc. At the time that I was doing that, let's just say it was in 2011, 2012, there was no compensation scheme. And so from my perspective, and I've been very keen to emphasize this, to ask somebody who says, I drove my relative once a fortnight for a year from their home to the immigration centre to report for immigration bail, I would like my petrol money, my depreciation back, to then say, where are your petrol receipts? I'm afraid would be frankly ludicrous, because there wasn't a scheme in place which would have encouraged me to keep that documentation. So that's the sort of claim that I feel very strongly the Home Office need to take on trust. And if they start to do that, they will build trust within the community. But if they insist on every I being dotted and every T being crossed, then I'm afraid they really will undermine what I think is otherwise a perfectly sensible scheme. It's based upon, I'm a compensation lawyer, the sort of approach that I would adopt if I was in the High Court, and the sorts of claims I think could be made. And there are about 14 different types of claim that you can make under the scheme. Close family members can make claims for the emotional impact and the out-of-pocket expenses, and claims can be inherited. So as a scheme, it's very comprehensive, but it's how it's implemented, which is absolutely crucial. And that's my job now, to keep on pushing for claims to be fairly assessed and generously compensated. Jackie mentioned the vulnerable persons team and compensation. Again, the individuals in charge of that team, I have met. Many of them are from ethnic minorities. Many are from Caribbean heritage. They are lovely people who work for the Home Office. They want to find issues that they can solve. They are getting people benefits reinstated, and they are getting people benefits backdated. But for government purposes, this is regarded as a DWP payment, not a compensation payment. Over £1 million, I understand, has been paid in this way as a result of their influence. But again, in communications terms, they're not taking credit for that, and they ought to. I also feel that around compensation, there's confusion in the sense that the scheme does what the scheme does. There's a much wider question of reparations to the community for greater and wider wrongs than as an individual you were threatened with deportation, as an individual you were detained for 2 weeks. There needs to be a proper political debate, it seems to me, about the damage that this has done to the community as a whole, and that's out with the scheme. And then the final thing I think I'd say about the actions of the Home Office at the moment is, and I was at a meeting where this was brought home very clearly to the current Home Secretary. If the deportation flights continue, that undermines the compensation scheme, and it places the community in real fear. Those flights are allowed as a matter of law, and so the pressure now has to be brought to change those laws. That's what needs to be done, because as long as you are flying people back, as I gave the example of somebody who comes here at 5 and is deported at 35, I was appalled to find out that the law allows the Home Office to argue that in those circumstances, a father of 3 children cannot advocate a right to family life. My children need me, my partner needs me. They, as a matter of law, the Home Office can say, you can keep in touch with your children by Skype. I, as a lawyer, didn't know that that was the law. When I walked around my chambers, which I would say is largely white middle class, and said, this is being done in your name, they were horrified, absolutely horrified. And I went into the Home Office the next day and I said, where is your mandate for these flights? And that's where the pressure needs to be brought to bear. I am really concerned that people are too fearful of claims of compensation, that they feel if they raise their head above the parapet, that they will find themselves at risk of deportation. And I'm delighted to be part of this event, but I think that the political pressure now needs to be brought to bear to end those flights, because they will undermine the compensation scheme. A very lovely man in Sheffield who's of Caribbean heritage has spent 2 years building up confidence with the community, even though he works for the Home Office, turning up to meetings there and then, helping people process the naturalization process. As soon as the flights were resumed in February, he was unfriended on Facebook. He was vilified on Twitter for being part of the Home Office. His position was seriously undermined. And I'm pleased to say that a white Home Office official in a meeting I attended was more than happy to explain to the Home Secretary how undermining of the process of compensation those flights were. And it remains to be seen what will happen next. But I think around the flights we need to mobilise, and I think that there needs to be very real protest. I don't think those flights are supported by the great and wider British public. But unfortunately, those flights, as I said, resumed with a vengeance in 2007. John Reid came in as the Hammer Home Secretary and said, in effect, Charles Clarke wasn't deporting anybody, so I'm going to start the process. I think the final thing I'd say around redress and criminality is that I don't even think the judges, I sit as a part-time criminal judge, I don't even think the judges would agree with this as a policy. 12 months is not regarded by the judiciary as a significant sentence. And yet that is enough to trigger. I think one young man was deported for driving offences, which is, as far as I'm concerned, utterly scandalous. Anyway, I've overrun my time as well. I'm sure Lee, you want to hand over to others.
Martin, thank you very much for your insights and your experience on these matters. I would say, wouldn't I, that there have been those of us who've been campaigning against those flights from day .1. It's not that there hasn't been any resistance. It's that people have not joined that resistance to oppose these gross injustices. And sometimes you can feel like Noah trying to build the ark in the middle of a metropolitan urban environment at the top of the...
Lee, what I say is I'm grateful. I mean, we need people like you, the people that are gritting the oyster. But I would come back to my point about whether we have true political representation. I spoke to a Labour MP who was asking me about political involvement myself. And you may know I've just been appointed to look at the scandalous behaviour of the party towards its own members. And I pointed out to her that the 2014 vote, which effectively cranked up the hostile environment, Ed Miliband whipped the Labour Party into abstention, which was truly shocking. So it reads to me as if they were actually all chasing the UKIP vote. You know, I want a party that doesn't want to be elected on the basis of racism. And I struggle to find one that doesn't see that as immigration and racism is a cheap way of gaining votes.
Hold on. Let me be absolutely clear, right? The Labour Party, the Tory Party on immigration go today where the Labour Party left them over the decades when they were in power. The Labour Party introduced more immigration legislation during its term in power during the post-war period than all of the combined opposition parties, including the Tory Party, combined. That's how much mainstream politics across the board has the responsibility collectively for the position we now find ourselves in. I am not one that takes the position.
Why do you think they did that? Is it because they did it because...
Hold on. I am not one that takes the position that this is a solely conservative driven agenda. Far from it. I think that the Tories have simply carried on where the Labour Party left off. If you're going to play politics with racism, then this is the descent to the bottom of the barrel that inevitably results as a consequence. I've got to move on because the to fit in. But thank you for that engagement. I'm looking
to be continued.
To be continued. Well, these are monthly debates, so we will want you to come back and engage with us further. As we,
I'd be delighted to. I'll wear my wig and gown next time.
We want you in your role that you worked so hard to achieve. Sure. Right. We want to Dawn Hill, who's the chair of the Black Culture Archives, and somebody else who's been an activist all her life, and I've known for more years than I can remember myself, I think. And I'm delighted that you're with us, Dawn, on the issue of justice and compensation. We've heard some of the challenges that Martin has identified and some of the things that he thinks are opportunities and wins. What's your take on where we are in terms of justice and compensation? I know you've been working at the Culture Archives to provide that key legal advice to support for people to make claims. Do tell us.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for inviting me to this this debate. It's fantastic. I think the lawyers at the beginning of this talk have explained so well the situation with the report of Wendy Williams. It's a fantastic report which I've read, and I just don't know how. I don't see the government doing anything about it, really. I think they'll try to do something, but I don't think they're going to get very far, because the whole thing is so entrenched, the injustice that has happened to the Caribbean people in the main. The Black Cultural Archives, I've been chair of the Black Cultural Archives for the last 7 years, and have been involved with it for the last 30-odd years. We collect, preserve, and celebrate the history of the African and Black community and Caribbean community in this country. So we were absolutely shocked when the scandal broke. And I took it upon myself, without any funding, to say, we've got to do something to help people. We're not lawyers, we're not social workers, we are historians, archivists, educate people, promote and celebrate, and that's what we do. So I met Jackie McKenzie, a brilliant lawyer, and we decided we'd do these free legal surgeries. And in about 2 months in 2018, we saw about 300 people came through the Black Cultural Archives to get their status sorted. And we thought, right, that everything's going to go all right now. You know, this is it. We had no money for it, but we used the money from our own pockets at times, and we got on with it. Because what we do feel is that the people who have been suffered from this situation is dreadful. We have such terrible stories, and this has been very much demonstrated here in the different talks this afternoon. And we just thought we're going to try and get people to get their status, and then when the compensation scheme comes along, we will also help. So more recently, since January, we had a big public meeting. Martin Ford was there, Jackie, several other people, and the surgery started again. But what we are finding is that people are not, the amount of people that we expected was in about 13 surgeries in January and February, we've seen 102 people. We could have seen more. We've seen 102 people in that time. Yes.
You know, Scott, excuse me.
We could have seen more people, yes. But what we found is that the casework from these people is so much that it's the lawyers, it's so important to have legal advice in completing these application forms, because the majority of people who are coming in, still a number of them still have not got their status established. They still have not got their status established. So we're not moving very fast forward, if you see what I'm saying. And they're also scared of going to the Home Office about anything. They don't go to the Citizens Advice Bureau, because even the Citizens Advice has said that the evidence, getting the evidence together is very difficult. The sort of people we're seeing, you know, one young man came in with his passport, and I said, "But why are you here? You've got a British passport." He said, "Yes, but I've been trying to get it updated, and now that I'm 36, to a British passport." I said, "Well, you've got one. What's wrong with your passport?" And he said, "Well, they said that the photograph that is in the document when I was 9 years old does not look like me anymore." And you thought, you know, I cannot make these stories up. And he tried 5 times to get a new passport and he couldn't. Not the sort of case you get is an old lady, 80-odd years, found on the street by 2 young men, and who were brothers, who asked her what was, you know, why was she on the street? And she was there, homeless. And they took her to their sister's home, and the sister took that lady in, and they then brought her to the surgery. Now, you know, I looked after her all evening.
Just got it back on again.
And she, you know, we've helped this old lady, and we're working again with Jackie's firm and some other lawyers to get through the evenings that and the morning. We have Saturday mornings or Wednesday afternoons to get through. And we've seen, as I said, in 13 surgeries, we've done 102 people. COVID-19 has come and we've had to close the building, but we are going to continue the surgeries for a further 2 months. We have this time raised money to do this, and we've had the JCWI, GLA bid, and we've got that. And we've also raised some money ourselves, and Lambeth has recently put some money towards us continuing the surgeries for another 2 months. So we're just being helpful. But the overall situation for an organization like Black Cultural Archives is that, you know, we're here to collect the history and promote it and celebrate the history of the Caribbean people. And we're just so, you know, it's so distressing to understand the trauma that people have had to go through because of these immigration laws. And I am pleased to say that there is a group of which I believe Clive Foster is one of the people, and I think my colleague from Croydon is also involved, the Windrush National Organization group, who are really pulling together to see how they can actually get better results from the Home Office. It does need a collective view of all the organizations to get anywhere, because I think the Home Office is not going to change. Well, I don't see how it's going to change in the circumstances, but we need to get some practical assistance into helping people to get this Windrush compensation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn Hill, again, giving a practical insight on what it's like to be a Black community organisation, providing the kind of key support that victims need. And the tales that we hear of vulnerable individuals, such as the man living out of a wheelchair, the elderly woman, Caribbean woman, wandering the streets of...
I think it's a time of clapping. It's a clapping time. It's for the NHS. It's the NHS. My daughter is on the drums. Clapping for the NHS. Oh dear. Okay. If I could just say one further thing before I go, is that can you all hear?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. What I did want to say is that we're the Cultural Archives. We have unique archives of the Caribbean and African people, more Caribbean than African in our archives. They are unique. And what we would really want to be able to do is to capture the stories of all the people who have had difficulties with this Windrush campaign for the archives for the future, because I think the young people coming up now, it will happen again if they don't understand what has happened in the past and happened to their grandparents and their parents. So really, we'd love to be able to have our archives is a history of what has been going on now. And also, I think there should be a Wendy Williams review of what has gone on with the COVID-19 situation and Black people.
Okay, well, thank you very much. If you've got stories that you can bring to the archives, then they're on Windrush Square in Brixton. I'm sure they'd love to hear from you and help you catalogue those stories. Yeah. I'm now going to go, if I may, to Carlton Young, and I'm glad we were able to join in the clapping for carers, particularly because the COVID-19 is so woefully impacted upon our communities. Councillor Carlton, you've been involved now in providing frontline support services in Croydon for the victims of Windrush action. Do give us your analysis on justice, restitution and compensation.
Thank you very much. Yeah, my name is Carlton Young. I'm a proud Black man. I always say that because I think more of us should say it frequently, because society is such that, we like people put us down. Thank you for inviting me to speak today, Lee. I'm going to start not just here in Croydon, because I think that I can usefully straddle the Home Office and Whitehall and what it does and what's happening here on the ground. I'm a former senior civil servant. Indeed, I think I was the first Black senior civil servant in Whitehall to hold a policy-making job. Furthermore, following the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, I went on loan to the Home Office because they had no Black senior civil servants of their own. And then Home Secretary Jack Straw felt he needed better informed advice. Indeed, when I first met Lee, he was a member of the Race Relations Forum that Jack ran. Upon arrival at the Home Office, Jack asked me to draft the white paper on race equality policy for him, and I jumped at the chance. However, my subsequent advice was the easiest I've ever given to a cabinet minister. I advised Jack all he had to do was change the date on the front cover of the 1975 Race Relations White Paper to 2000, because all of the policies necessary for achieving race equality in this country had already been written 25 years earlier. So there's no need for more policies, but for actually public bodies like the Home Office to start acting fairly. You get my drift where I'm going with this. So to encourage organisations like the Home Office to act fairly, my supplementary advice to the Home Secretary was to develop a legal duty for public bodies to promote race equality, to help them avoid race discrimination in the first place. So we made a public duty law through an amendment to the Race Relations Act, which is now incorporated in the Equalities Act 2010. The duty worked, but then it didn't, because it certainly didn't stop the Home Office with its hostile environment towards us. I should say, actually, I don't think that hostile environment came from some dark place within the Home Office. I think it came from business as usual. I know this from my own experience there, because on my very first day working there, so I come in now as a senior civil servant, I was met by my secretary who was trembling like a leaf. And when I got to the bottom of why, she revealed that she was worried for me because the staff working in the Home Office Race Equality Unit did not want to work for me as a Black man. And I'm saying this because I want to really counter what was just said by Martin about it being just ministers. I think the Home Office has a deep-seated problem with its culture. Suffice to say, some of those people in that unit were moved on very quickly. But another example of this is when I used to work late on Friday nights, simply because I knew that there would be parts of the Home Office that would submit what I consider to be racist policy submissions to the Home Secretary for his weekend box, because they didn't want to clear it with the race equality advisors, so they'd try and slip it in. So Friday night, I'd whip it out of the box. Monday morning, we'd have discussions to try and iron it out. And they were already fisticuffs at dawn. So here we are 2 decades later after I've left. We find the Home Office trying to right wrongs it has done to Windrushers. people who, despite their legal right to be in the UK, were prevented from coming back into this country from overseas trips, were legally detained, denied access to work, housing and other services, with some losing jobs and homes. Lives were destroyed. What could we pay out for this? What would the payout be? The Windrush compensation scheme aims to address this. However, making a claim under the scheme is not straightforward, especially for the many elderly people who were affected. The form is 18 pages long, guidance 44 pages long, scheme rule book 45 pages long. I don't think that cuts the mustard. The only help provided by the Home Office with this onerous form filling comes via the Citizens Advice Bureau, in which victims have no faith. The scheme has fixed tariffs. I won't go through them. And there's no independent right of appeal under the scheme. Now, the Home Office has said this scheme is fair, accessible, and generous. Indeed, I think I've heard Martin say that as well. But as we know, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. In this instance, it is the number of victims compensated and the level of compensation that matters. We'll all remember the Guardian headline, Windrush victim rejects insulting offer of 22,000 payout. The victim, Glenda Caesar, I think she's online today, who has been out of work for a decade, described that offer as crumbs. Furthermore, we all know that in the first 10 months of the scheme, only 36 victims were compensated. That's an average award of £1,700. I know Martin might have just explained part of that, but it's just not good enough. Because even now we know that there are only 3,700, well, there are 3,720 cases that are still waiting to be processed. There shouldn't be a backlog with this. The resources should have been made available. So I would say that these outcomes are neither fair, accessible, or generous. So locally, to improve the number of victims coming forward, I know many Black churches and groups, like my own in Croydon African Caribbean Family Organisation. We've had well-attended meetings to encourage victims to come forward. I think I've managed to get about over 300 people through the doors in Croydon. Because we're well positioned to engender trust in a system that has badly let them down. However, to raise the level of payouts, personally, I draw the line at providing advice and helping with form filling. I'll get them in, I'll generate the trust, but I won't help them fill out those forms because I believe the Home Office should pay for to receive legal advice. They should not do it on the cheap by exploiting our lawyers or the goodwill of volunteers in our community. Now, I hope the tender scheme for legal advice will help.
We're losing you.
But for me,
I'm afraid your connection is not very good.
Jury is out on the scheme.
I'm afraid. Yeah, sometimes it doesn't look like it's coming back. Councillor Young from Croydon, your connection was very, very bad. Maybe we'll try and pick that up. There's been some fascinating debates on this, and I think this has opened up, this whole debate has really opened up more questions than we can.
I think I'm back now.
Answer.
Yeah, just come to the end. I said, for me, the jury is out on the scheme, given my past experience at the Home Office and the scale of the challenge, not least the culture. And until that's changed, as recommended by Wendy Williams, I think we might still struggle. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm going to move swiftly on.
Can I come back on a couple of things there, just very quickly, because these are myths. Some of these are myths, and I need to correct them.
I know everybody will want to come back on something. The point is I've got another panel, and people have to go to other appointments. And if I continue with this, I'm going to lose them.
That's fine. I can be 20 seconds because I think part of the problem is people are being self-claiming because of some of these myths. There are two rights of appeal. The second one is entirely independent. To divide the 62,000 by the number of claimants is very, very misleading. As I've explained, most are interim payments. There are 6-figure claims in the pipeline. The Glenda Caesar case has prompted a change through me in the mitigation of loss rules. She won't allow me to say what she's going to get, but it's going to be many, many multiples of her first offer, and that shows that the scheme with the right of appeal can work. I'm really concerned the negativity Carlton is propagating is going to stop people coming forward, because he's clearly more trusted, justifiably, than the Home Office.
Okay,
That's what
I'm going to have to curtail that and move on. And again, because of the time lapse, I'm not going to be able to do a Q&A at the end of this session. So I'm going to move on, if I may, to my dear old friend, Sir Geoffrey. And he's been waiting very patiently, and I know he's got another Zoom call. So, Sir Geoffrey, in Scotland, Ochai how are you?
Hope he's there.
Are you with us, sir? Oh, he seems to have frozen out, unless I can get him back very shortly. We may have some reconnection. Scotland is back on the broadband. So Geoffrey Palmer, can you hear me, sir? No. Okay. Well, look, guys, I'm going to bring this panel to an end. There's been some wonderful contributions, feisty in this one, I must say. And it's unusual for me to be a moderator, because otherwise I'd be in there. But I will. I've left you to your own devices. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Geoffrey Palmer, are you with us? Hello, Geoffrey.
Hello. Hello. Can you hear me?
We can indeed. We're waiting for your contribution on justice, restitution, and compensation.
My phone is playing up in Scotland. I live in the hills.
We know.
Okay, so
in the Scottish Highlands somewhere between Mount. Yes.
Can you hear me though? I'll start speaking if you can.
Intermittently, but do carry on.
Okay. What I would like to say is that I'd like to thank everybody for what has been said tonight. And there are just a few things I would like to say, because everybody said everything already. I listened for said, the demonstrations, and that is absolutely critical. However, that must be accompanied by a structure where, in fact, you have if it's the BAME, must be seen as by the government as an authoritative body. And that body can then hold the government to account. If you don't have that established, then they will continue to mess us about. And therefore, somehow that needs to be conveyed to the government. To be honest, visiting the Commons, visiting the Lords isn't going to. In Scotland, what we did to get BME nurses promoted, we actually set up a committee. We actually approached the NS and told them that is official. And we drew up a course, which in fact nurses will then attend. We had not one BME senior nurse in management. And therefore we did this, and within years, we now have 12. So therefore, what I'm saying is that you need a structure, and if that structure has to be funded by the government, then it must be. Because in fact, the people whom are dependent on us to get their rights in terms of the competition, in terms of not being deported when they've been British citizens for over 300 years. I think, in fact, what we need is a body, and if that body, when it is set up, need to draw on expertise from anywhere in the country, then, in fact, that must be done. Also, what I would like to add is the matter about the research on COVID with regard to BAME people. Again, we need an organized voice, a voice which is responsible, which will hold the government to account. and which the government recognizes. And the fact is that that committee must also draw on expertise, scientific and social, because what I read this morning somebody sent a copy of the Telegraph, where David Green actually wrote an article about this, about BAME people, and he was talking about victimhood. What we've got to be careful thereof is that our legitimate complaint will be seen as victimhood. It's like, you know, slavery was victimhood, because we have complained about the self and the consequences. And therefore, with the COVID research, this body must look at the methodology. It must look at the validity of the methodology, and it must look at the results to make sure that they were done with proper controls. And thus, you need a scientist to actually advise on the validity of methodology. Because what I'm worried about, what I read this morning, comparisons were being made with sickle cell anemia. And what that means is that they are going to put forward the concept that it is because BAME people have got different genetics. And if something is genetics related, then it doesn't need to be addressed because it's reality. And what I'm saying, need an organized structure, and this structure may have to be funded by the government. And therefore, you know, for our own people who are like my brother, who system killed the hostile environment, and a lot of kids and a lot of people have suffered before this. Is not new. Therefore, what I like to see is a structure, a formalized structure. The BAME can take that role, but it must draw on the community and listen to the community. And as one of your, somebody who submitted a question, the lady made a very valid point. If behavior do not have consequences, then in fact, you cannot hold account. Thank you very much, and God bless, and please keep safe and well.
Thank you very much from the remote isles up there in the hills of Scotland, Sir Geoffrey Palmer. The line was quite poor. Can I say thank you very much to that panel? Again, we would have had Q&As, but you guys ate up all the time. So I'm forced to go to the next panel just simply because we are now running 40 minutes late and people have got things to do. So I need to get this final panel online. Martin, Carlton, Sir Geoffrey Palmer, Dawn Hill, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your evening. And these will be monthly podcasts. So we'll be coming back to you for updates. And this won't be the last word on this particular matter. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you.
Thank you. So there you have it, restitution and justice. You see, I'm old school. You know, I hear about the policy, I hear about the law, I hear about the politics. But I know that if a community is not organized, not functioning, doesn't have its own political and business economies, then whatever it claims, it's always going to appear weak in the face of government.
Okay, and thank you, Sheo, for...
Thank you, Geoffrey Palmer. I didn't know you were still on the line. But to be organized, to be self-organized, to be self-funded, to be independent, to speak with our own voice, this has got to be part of the solution to this problem, notwithstanding all the issues that people have said there. Power concedes nothing without demand. We must increase the extent to which we organise ourselves to place radical demands for justice for these Windrush victims and for broader issues around COVID. I'm going to the next panel now, which is the shifting the hostile environment. And I'm joined on this panel, and we'll be concluding after this, by Zita Holborn, who's an author and poet, chair of BARAC, Black Activists Rising Against the Cuts, an organisation I was very proud to be a co-chair and co-founder with Zita many moons ago. I'm not seeing her on my screen, so wondering whether she's left in protest about you kept so long. Oh, thank you. You stuck with us. Thank you very much. We did clap along with for the carers, but I
went out.
You to do there.
I went outside to clap.
Of the PCS union. If you don't know about trade unions, PCS union has been, in my view at least, one of the most progressive unions in relation to race equality in the UK. We're also joined by Dr. Agri Burke. Dr. Agri Burke, who I've known for many years, is a consultant, a psychiatrist, very many years note, and we will know, and you will know, that the impact of this COVID-19 and the drama of the Windrush, in some ways, people denied access to public funds have themselves died very lonely deaths, and the trauma of all of this on our community runs deep, and we'll be looking forward to hearing from him. We're also joined by Jaja Mohammed, who runs the Broccoli podcast, and she has also produced other material around the Windrush scandal. And the only person I think under 30, at least she looks under 30 from where I'm sitting there. Sorry if I go on the past today. So I'm delighted that we've been able to you've been able to stay with us. And finally, from my own hometown, deep in the hills of the northwest, is Anthony Brown from Manchester, who is director of Windrush Defenders and himself been a victim of this hostile environment. Can I first of all thank you so much for sticking with us to the end, much delayed though we were. My chairing skills were abysmal as they ran away with the time scale, but we're going to continue until the end. And so if I may begin on shifting the hostile environment, Zita, you've been working with others and campaigning organizations for many years. We remember opposing the first deportation flights when there were about 6 people outside the Home Office, and also providing food and much needed welfare to the migrants in Calais and abroad. What do you see about shifting this hostile environment?
Well, I think what happened over the last 10 years actually tells us quite a bit about what we're going to face now and you know, what we need to do. The fact that 10 years of austerity came alongside the deepening hostile environment and the attacks on migrant communities, deportations, detentions, the Windrush scandal, you know, those things didn't happen in a vacuum. When austerity happens, what we see is a shift to the right across society, across politics, the rise of the far right, the scapegoating of Black and migrant communities. And the ONS have published today a report with data which tells us what we've all been saying, you know, over the last few weeks. We know that Black people are dying disproportionately. And what that report is, there's no proper monitoring being done, and they had to cross-reference census records to identify this data. That Black, as in African diaspora people, are up to 4 times more likely to die from coronavirus. Asian people are up to 3 times more likely to die from coronavirus. And many of the reasons for this are socioeconomic reasons, because of poor housing, overcrowded housing, and a key reason is the fact that a large number of our community work in public sector jobs on the front line, most at risk of the virus, with little done to protect them from it. So, you know, over the last couple of months, people have been campaigning for PPE, and there's still not that proper protection. And I speak as the mother of a son who is a key worker. You know, it's worrying every day when he goes out to work. The pressures that they're putting on the workers, making them work longer hours, more awkward, unsociable shifts, putting them at risk without the protection. We need the government to take action now. So, you know, the Windrush scandal is going to continue, I believe. You know, because what we're going to see is when we come out of the coronavirus crisis, is we're going to go into an economic crisis. And if we go into an economic crisis, Black communities are going to be worse placed, disproportionately impacted, as we've seen over the last 10 years, in those precarious jobs, on the low pay, with the worst terms and conditions. And also, they're going to be scapegoated and face racist attacks and racist abuse. And there's going to be division, because that's what politicians do, to try and divide and rule communities. And our immediate thing that we have to deal with is the number of our people that are dying. And I believe that we need those people taken off those frontline jobs. If they're not going to be guaranteed the proper protection and the full protection they need to be taken away from those jobs and given other jobs to do, or taken off work altogether on full pay. So we're going to have a battle on our hands. And I think that we need absolute and complete unity across our communities. And in the meantime, we need proper monitoring of those who are getting coronavirus. We know that there's going to be an inquiry. People are calling for a public inquiry as well. But we can't wait for inquiries to, you know, go through their course. We know how long inquiries take. They're not short, quick things, and they don't provide immediate solutions. It's horrendous, you know, that there is no monitoring, that there's no process of monitoring. And I think that needs to be an urgent demand. So the government have already said that when the coronavirus crisis is over, they're going to continue with the hostile environment, detaining people, deporting them. And we've seen news reports today about the conditions for those that are still stuck in detention centres. The people that are in those detention centres will tell you that the conditions feel worse than being in prison for those who have previously been in prison, which of course many people haven't. They're criminalising our communities, and I think it's crucial that we stand together, that we stand united. We can't allow divisions between us. We need a mass mobilisation. We need very efficient organising. And we need to be robust in our demands and non-apologetic. And we need to counter any negativity and blaming of us for the fact that, you know, our communities are dying. So we need to be prepared. We need to be organized. We need to mobilize, and we need to speak out very loud and very clearly about what our demands are, and stand up for our communities against the hostile environment, against the disproportionate impact of austerity, against all forms of racism, everyday racism, as well as institutional racism, because they're all part of the same issue as the hostile environment. You know, we are stuck with the government that we've got, who just want to introduce more draconian and racist laws and make them policy. We have all these people, as you've heard from the previous speakers, who haven't received compensation yet. We have the Windrush Lessons Learned report, which goes short of saying that there's institutional racism in the Home Office, but the reality there is institutional racism in the Home Office. And some of my members of the PCS union work there, and are Black and minority ethnic workers who face horrific discrimination, racist harassment and bullying, discrimination in the reporting system, and more. and that needs to be addressed as well. And whilst everything is focused on coronavirus, which of course it's got to be focused on coronavirus right now, nobody, in government or in policy is focusing on all of these other issues that have been impacting on our communities for a long time. It's almost like we have to put our lives on hold and our rights on hold. So it's really important that we have forums like this, where we bring those issues to the forefront, and that we ensure that government policy makers and pundits don't forget about the issues that have been impacting on us and the underlying reasons for why we're dying disproportionately. Thank you.
Dita, can I thank you? One of the most concise presentations this evening, and stuck well within your brief. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to move on, if I may, to speak to Dr. Agri-Burke. Dr. Agri-Burke, welcome to this platform. We will all know that the trauma of whether it's COVID or whether it's the Windrush deprivation of our natural born citizenship rights has profound effects on our mental well-being and our health. In relation to shifting the hostile environment, what are your thoughts?
Well, thanks a lot. Lee, it's good to be a member of this forum. And I must thank Jackie McKenzie for her efforts in this regard. The hostile environment is, I could say it's a hell of a thing, because it's been with us for a very long time. In about 1945, the Moyne Commission submitted a report on the conditions in the West Indies, British West Indies as it was then. Nothing had happened after the emancipation of slavery for 100 years, and the conditions among the slaves, the descendants of slaves, had become extremely bad. And Britain became aware of this, and the main reason for this was that the landowners didn't do anything, and everything ran down. And so we have the background to come into Britain. And the question for me is, is the population that I'm part of British or Caribbean? Is it British or Ghanaian or Nigerian? Is it British or Zimbabwean? Is it British or Indian or Pakistani or Bangladesh? You see, we have this real problem, and the most profound problem is for the Caribbean people, because in a way, we don't have a clear-cut home. So there is this issue as to, are we coming to Britain to find a home? Well, we came to find work. And when I came back from the Caribbean, I'd started training in Jamaica and Trinidad, having done medical school here. And I applied for a job in the postgraduate institute, and I was told, but Trinidad or Jamaica will have to pay, because, you know, if you get a place here. But I said, I'm British. And that was the start I had of the problem that we're talking about today, the hostile environment. And again, I had an experience when the New Cross fire came on and destroyed 14 of our youngsters. And I was called to the office of my senior, where I was working, and told, do not get involved in this. And the question was, what was that saying? And I said, well, I've set up a counseling group, and, you know, I'm in it. These are my people. And the question is, can you have your people and their people, or are we all the same people? It's a very interesting situation. And indeed, there is this issue among us as to whether we are mainly committed to the upliftment of the youngsters and the high representations. I worked a lot in among children who have been taken into the care of the local authority, and we're twice as likely to be there. We are 3 or 4 times as likely to be permanently excluded from school. We are, the prison population, the mental health populations, the secure hospitals, we are much more likely than other groups to be there. So the question is this simply that the hostile environment is beating us into the ground to such an extent that we can't really move out of our position and make sense of it? And this is a serious issue because as a professional, one doesn't work only with Caribbean or only with African or only with Asian. One works across the board, but one can't help but see the very marked differences in outcome that occur, as we have Jaja has just been talking about with the coronavirus 19, COVID-19. I want to just make a mention now, a little bit of a mention on the effect of the hostile environment on our psychological state. Have we been so displaced that we are afraid, we are terrified of what we face, what we are in? Are we so dislocated from society that we can't move forward? Or is it that society, when it sees us putting our heads above the parapet, knocks them back down? Or could there be a combination of the two? Well, if you're a mother in this situation, or a parent generally, you're very scared for your young people because you know that the chances they have are far less than many other people in the society. So how do we move away from that? Is a question I ask myself. How do we begin to have the levels of support for those mothers, those parents who are fearful for the outcome for their children? I want to just make one final bit of information here. In 1975, I think it was, this is a long time ago, 45 years ago, I returned to Jamaica to look at what had happened to patients who had been sent back, because it was felt that if you are mentally ill patient in hospital here in Britain, when I say it was felt, my profession had a strong feeling among many of its members that if you sent these people back to the Caribbean, they'd get better. They'd be in a better environment, they'd get better. Well, I went back and tried to find out, is this so? And the answer is, it's not. Half wanted to return to Britain. The conditions they met there, the poverty, the difficulty, they weren't welcome. So they didn't get better. And the conditions were not good, so they couldn't even make sense of their lives there. And you will remember the Prime Minister Cameron, he offered Jamaica a prison because we are overrepresented in the prisons as well. And the question is the hostile environment the outcome of the British system? I say system because I don't want to say British people, because on the one hand, there's some among the British people, like ourselves, who want to be here. So, and there's some who welcome us here, but they're in the system of authority. There are many who are hostile to this situation. So how do we go about it then? How do we begin to make sense of it? Well, I think we need to think carefully about how we proceed. We need to have people who are committed to the idea of the well-being of young people of all BME groups who have been disadvantaged in a big way, and are finding it difficult. We can't have people who are half-hearted in this. People have to be full-hearted in it. I know it might affect our mortgages, and therefore, people who have a mortgage to protect, perhaps it's going to be difficult to be in the middle of this. And so I think I will end there because it's a huge problem. Jacqueline, I'm so happy that you've organized this, and really thanks a lot for being the chairing of this. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Agri-Berg, giving us great insight there into some of the dilemmas and complexities of having this dual citizenship, not even dual identities. Are we British? Are we Caribbean? Are we African? Are we British? It's the dilemma encapsulated by Frantz Fanon in one of his most famous books, the French sociologist and psychiatrist Frantz Fanon and historian. Black Skin, White Mask. If you haven't read it, I suggest you get out and get yourself a copy to be further illuminated. I'm going to move right on, if I may, to Jaja Mohammed from the Broccoli podcast. As we come to the end of this long but important, I think, debate around shifting the hostile environment, what is your view and take both on what you've heard and the general perception of this imposition of this brutally vicious, hostile environment on our communities?
Well, I just wanted to start off by saying thank you for inviting me onto this panel. I really, really do appreciate it. And so many well-experienced experts on this panel. I'll just start off by introducing myself. I'm Jaja Mohammed. I'm a journalist and producer at Broccoli Content, which was actually founded by Renee Richardson in response to the lack of opportunities, both in front and behind of the mic for minority talent. And that's very important to be part of such a company like that. My response in regards to the hostile environment, I'm actually part of the Windrush generation. My grandparents on both sides came over from Jamaica and to start a new life for themselves. So when people are being shipped back, so to say, or flown back, that could have been me. So it's very, very personal. And it's devastating. I was actually so shocked when I saw the bulletin go up about the Windrush scandal. I was actually working at the BBC at the time, and it was very shocking to me. And during my time at the BBC, I pushed and pushed to get a story out. At the time, I would say that my voice I didn't have as big of as a platform as I do now. However, I pushed and it took a year to convince people to realize that the Windrush scandal is important. And, I really, really felt as though I just wanted people to care. And that's quite hard if people can't identify with the struggle. We can be here and we're all in the same kind of empathy, and we empathize with all of these people who've been afflicted by this because we're probably connected to them in some kind of way. However, there's many who aren't. And I think that was the biggest struggle, to keep on pushing and saying, why don't you care about this? So luckily this year, got the chance to use the platform. So Broccoli Content is a podcast production company, and the podcast that we've made is called Your Broccoli Weekly. And we're doing specials primarily because of coronavirus. We're actually, I recorded in my room that I'm in right now under a duvet, and recorded a two-parter. And the first part was mainly focused on people from the Windrush generation, being invited over in the period of 1948 to 1971. And the welcoming invite and come to this great land. I remember my grandma telling me that she had been told that the pavements were paved with gold. And I thought, wow, that's ridiculous. But these were the stories that people would say about this great motherland, right? Or this great mother country. So I really wanted to get to grips with that, of this great country that they were invited to So I had a conversation with Alison Williams, MBE, and she was served for NHS for 35 years of her life. And something sparked when I had a conversation with her, because she's a great storyteller. She's actually one of the pioneers who is the anchor for Notting Hill Carnival. So moving on, the NHS thing sparked my interest, and then obviously we're in our houses, and it was I think it was either a Thursday or Friday afternoon, and there was a tweet that came out from Amelia Gentleman saying, guys, this is coming out tomorrow, which is the Lessons Learned Review. This is coming out tomorrow. Don't let it get buried. And I just felt like, you've asked me what my response is to the hostile environment and my reactions to how we're being treated. This is literally the amalgamation of it. It's gotten buried again. So the connection between COVID-19, the NHS, is way deeper than we actually think. When I thought about it deeper, I looked into the NHS when it started. The NHS basically launched in 1948. In 1948, we were called over. So I was thinking, wow, okay, well, there's a deep connection. We were asked to help build up the NHS. We were asked to help build back up Britain. And then going fast forward into 2020, whilst we're here, there was this very terrible rumor saying at first that Black people can't get COVID. It was a running joke on social media. People were laughing about it, but obviously, a month later, we're actually seeing the repercussions of our frontline key workers and essential workers who are literally being seen as heroes, which I say in inverted commas, because it's not their job to put their life on the line for us all. They're not martyrs. They're not going out there to die, but many people are going out there because they have no choice. Actually, last week, so I'm still working on the Your Broccoli Weekly show, and last week we did a program which was basically about the statement, The Great Equalizer. So if you've seen it, there was a statement that was going around by a few politicians, celebrities, saying that COVID-19 is the great equalizer and everybody's equal now, and we're all going through the same thing, and COVID-19 attacks everybody, and we're all the same. Bearing in mind, these are people who are in their grand houses, and they're able to isolate themselves in different parts of their worlds in their houses. Mind you, there are people going out to work still who've not even taken a day off. And actually, as said earlier, I think Zita said it, under a lot of pressure, a lot more pressure than usual, because there's a lot of people who've been sick and many people dying. So as I said, the relation between NHS and COVID-19 is way deeper than we think. So one of the things that I really, really wanted to mention, because I know that I don't want to go over because it's over already, but one of the things I wanted to mention is, as you said, I'm under 30, I just turned 29. However, one of the main things that I grasped from my conversations with one of the people that I interviewed, Colin Grant, who wrote the book Homecoming, is that we need to have intergenerational conversations. One of the things I found from my grandparents is that they didn't necessarily share as much. You really had to poke and prod, but there's an art to it. And it's just allowing people to be. And I'm not saying that I got all the answers or the tips, but it's having those intergenerational conversations and knowing that just because of age, it doesn't mean that people won't grasp each other's stories, and sharing and being willing to share. And another bit from Colin that I grasped from him was that we have to use our platforms correctly. And I wouldn't say that I'm not an expert in anything. I literally just am passionate. I've been to many of the meetings. I've met Jackie, I've met Patrick, you know, and I just have an interest in our people. And there's a lot of us out here. There's a lot of us, to name a few: Nadine White, Rihanna Croxford. You know, these are people who are working hard to publicize on Twitter or their platforms on the news, and to really push. So that's what I'll end with, is just to keep on using our platforms.
Jaja, thank you so much for that insight. And if you haven't looked at or heard or visited her website and heard some of Broccoli Productions, then I suggest you get over there and have a listen. I'm going to move right on to our penultimate, but not least, our final speaker. His name is Anthony Brown. He's the director of Windrush Defenders, my hometown of Manchester. Anthony, thank you for waiting so patiently, sir. It's been a trial for this last panel, trying to hurry up the previous two. I have to say, I'll have to be much more ruthless next time round, I think, in Cherry. But in terms of yourself, shifting the hostile environment, and you've been a victim of this hostile environment, give us your take.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Lee. And it's great to be having these discussions. I've picked up on a number of things that people have been saying. But for me, this started when I first came to this country. The hostile environment was when I got here, and as a little young 6-year-old, I went to school and people were calling you wog, nigger, and all the rest of it. So for me, that was a hostile environment. It moved on from there, and being in Manchester, people were saying to me, "Are you a blue?" I didn't know what that was, and because I couldn't answer, I was beaten up. Then another group would come along and said, "Are you a red?" I didn't know what that was, so you get beaten up again. So you soon learn that there are different groups that you could belong to and different identities. And I think that a lot of what we've been discussing in terms of Britishness and British nationality, it's really about having multiple identities. People have no problems in Liverpool being a Liverpudlian and then being English and then being European. They can have a number of identities, but somehow with Caribbean people, you've either got to be Caribbean or Jamaican, and that's it. You can't be British and Jamaican and African. Well, I believe I can be. And when I came here, I'd grown up in an environment that was all British. I didn't know anything else. I was born at the time in '60 when Jamaica was still a colony of the UK. So I was born a citizen of the United Kingdom and colony. Then in '62, they passed the Jamaica Independence Act. And that act, Section 2.2, caused that status to cease. Then 1971, they passed the Immigration Act. And that meant that although I began as a British citizen, coming to my own country, I then became an immigrant in my own country. My parents then took me back to Jamaica. I then came back again after going to school there for 4 years. When I wanted to go to university, I was told I was an overseas student. So I wrote to the Home Office and said, you know, what's the position? They wrote back saying that, yeah, I was an overseas student and I needed to report to Manchester Airport to be deported because I'd been out of the country 2 years, and that was because of the 71 Act. So we fought an anti-deportation campaign in Manchester. So, and we'd had, you know, Margaret Thatcher come to power saying that we were being swamped by immigrants. The hostile environment has been around for decades. So from being a British citizen to becoming an immigrant and then being threatened with deportation, then roll forward a few more years, a few more decades, and I go to get a job. I'm told that I need to produce my passport to get a job, which, you know, before you didn't. This was in 2008. I hadn't traveled for a while. My passport had expired. It was indefinite leave in the passport, but the passport, because the passport had expired, they said I couldn't get the job. They'd hold it open for me, but by the time I'd sent to Jamaica and got it back and sent to the Home Office to get it stamped, the job was gone. So I got hit by a hostile environment twice. So then roll forward a few more years, and Theresa May makes this apology and creates the Windrush scheme. I then apply for the Windrush scheme, and they restore my citizenship. So all those changes have taken place, or changes in nationality, but my identity, I'm still the same person. Now, people talk about the wrongs that have been done to the Windrush generation. I feel I've been wronged because I've missed out on, you know, lots of life chances. And what I've been saying is that instead of what they're saying in terms of compensations, there needs to be reparations, because the difference between compensation and reparations is that with compensation, you just, you know, putting the person back in the position they would have been in as far as money would allow. But with reparations, you're actually looking to do more than just pay money. You're looking to make amends. You're looking to do a whole range of things. And I believe that the hostile environment has not just impacted on immigration issues. I feel that there's been a hostile environment in education. There's huge disparities in education, in the achievement of African Caribbean young people compared to the wider community. There's a hostile environment in health. There are huge health disparities. There's a hostile environment in employment, criminal justice. So these disparities need to be tackled. So one of the things that we've been campaigning for is that we've set up Windrush Defenders, and we've been organizing surgeries where we've been helping people to rectify their status. We've been helping people to claim compensation. And then what we're looking at now is law reform, and Martin mentioned this quite a little with regards to deportation, but there's a whole range of laws, because we've got to this because of all the changes in immigration laws and many other laws over the last 70 years. And I think we're kidding ourselves if we think that making changes within the Home Office is going to make any difference to what happens in the wider public, because it's not the Home Office that's throwing people out of their jobs when they don't have the right documentations. It's employers. It's not the Home Office that's stopping people renting houses. It's the landlords. It's not the Home Office that's stopping people getting a bank account. All these things are affected by law. And if we don't change the laws, we'll be like hamsters on a treadmill, running round and round and round, wondering how on earth, you know, we can change this hostile environment. So there's a framework of law that's creating all these issues. And one of the things that we've done is, you know, we're saying that this took decades to get to this stage. So if we're going to unwind all this, we must think in terms of decades of campaigning, of fighting and changing. It's a waste of time to make demands. We've been demanding and demanding and asking, and nobody listens. You've got to work, you've got to fight, you've got to find out how laws are made, which MPs are going to support you, and you're going to campaign and work. And each generation is going to have to do this. So our young people, what we've done is we've got a group of young people who we're working with as well, and we're teaching them to lead the fight, because if they don't understand what has happened, and how to tackle it, and what are the strategies that they need to use, or then how are they going to fare in the next 5-10 years when they're coming up against the same issues? So, you know, they've got to be in it with us, fighting alongside us, learning, you know, as we go along. So that's what we're doing within Windrush Defenders, and I hope, you know, people will support us and join us in that fight.
Thank you very much for that final panel. Well, it's 9 o'clock and we're losing our audience, so I'm not going to delay it much further. To Zita, to Jaja, to Anthony, to our esteemed psychologist, Dr. Agri Burke, we say good night, farewell. Thank you for bearing with us and staying with us to the end. I think the three panels have made an incredible contribution to the debate, and these debates will now be monthly. So we look forward to continuing with particular themes in the future. But from now, from that panel, we say good night. And just some concluding thoughts from me before we end with a poem from Zita Holborn on, I think it's redefining history is the title of the poem she's going to read. But some concluding thoughts from me as your chair. First of all, thank you for staying with us throughout the course of this debate. It's gone on rather longer than we attended, but these issues are necessarily complex and sometimes indeed in need of a very great explanation. But I think nevertheless, you'll agree with me that the quality of the panels has been great indeed. I'm an activist of very many years standing, and I know power concedes nothing without demand. And whatever it is we're seeking to do, whether that's legal or political reform, unless you are an organized community. The currency of politics is mass organization. If you have an organization of 1 million people, you will be listened to, you will be heard, you will get your way in terms of influencing the debate. I remember, you know, things like the animal welfare groups who fundamentally changed British politics, I think in the 2010 election. Look at the Extinction Rebellion young people. They came to London and locked off London for 2 weeks, 14 days. They were out there making their point, and they shifted public opinion and they shifted political opinion. And so the lesson, I think, for us is not one that we need to learn, it's one that we need to remember, because they learned their protest politics from the politics of the Black community in resisting racism, both here in the United Kingdom and also in the United States, and the liberation movements on the African continent. So this is nothing new for us, and we should return to our traditions of trust, ethics, and unity. Yes, we need unity. Yes, we need organization. Yes, we need action. We also need ethical leadership. Far too often in our struggle, we have people having secret meetings behind closed doors, without reporting back, without a mandate to have those meetings, without any transparency of what's going on. And government is always able to peel off some of us into those private cabals of the houses of power and parliament for secret meetings behind closed doors. We have to have accountability. We've got to be accountable to the community that we're seeking to serve. I'm a public servant. That's my leadership, public service. And so it's got to be outward facing to the community. And what we say on their behalf has to have a mandate that is supported by them. It has to be intergenerational. It's time for me to retire and make space for the next generation of leadership. There are far too many people of my age group. Instead of providing wise counsel and support to develop the next group of leaders who are undoubtedly going to have to face challenges we never even dreamt of, we're still need to hold on to our positions of influence and power instead of standing aside and developing the next generation and looking to succession planning. And then there's empathy, compassion, and understanding. We don't organize. We're not organized because we don't essentially trust each other. That's the bottom line. We suspect each other, and that's because the culture of this country has been one that has conspired with various of our so-called, in quotes, leaders, taken them behind closed doors, given them fat salaries in some cases, and we've never seen or heard of them again until they're wheeled out in defense of government policy and so on. So all of these issues really are issues we're going to be exploring as we go forward. My name's Lee Jasper. I'm the Vice Chair of BAME for Lawyers. I'm also a founding member of Black Sucks, the social movement, and I'm a proud sponsor of that. On Saturday morning at 10 to 12, we're going to be discussing, with only a panel of 4 people, the coronavirus and Black communities. I've been hearing and watching and reading the theories around COVID, the reports about the disproportionate impact. I think it's time we had a real solid Black discussion about unpacking the COVID virus as it's impacted upon communities. That's this Saturday, the 9th of May, between 10 and 12. Thank you for watching. Do follow BME for Lawyers on Facebook and on Twitter at BME4. And now if I could ask our resident artist for the movement across the piece, Lisa Holberg, to close us out with redefining history. Thank you and good night.
Thank you. This is my book, Striving for Equality, Freedom and Justice, very quick plug, and Redefining History is in that. And I thought it was apt to end this panel discussion because it is our community that's there on the front line, keeping the country running right now. And it's a reminder of our contribution to Britain. We, our parents, our grandparents, came to this country and in half a century redefined Britain's history. Arriving by ship enthusiastically, we were greeted by the mist and the grey of the sea. The bitter cold of the winter season was nothing compared to the ice-cold freezing attitude of those in this country, full of hatred and hostility. Greeted by signs of keep Britain white, we'd come unprepared for a fight. No dogs, no Irish, no blacks. We had to always watch our backs. We were told this was the mother country. What mother uses terms that are derogatory? What kind of mother rejects and sets out to inject a sense of worthlessness within the child she should caress? For 50 years, we've struggled and fought, sometimes defiant, sometimes distraught, to make a place and be accepted as young or old and black and gifted. And look what we've achieved despite having to live aggrieved. We've excelled within this land that refused a helping hand, in spreading the word of the Holy Scriptures, in trade unions and in literature, in sports and politics, in broadcasting and music, in entertainment and education. We helped empower this nation. Despite the fact we were deceived, we came and we achieved. We, our parents, our grandparents, came to this country and in half a century redefined Britain's history. Redefined Britain's history. Thank you.
And that's it from us. Good night, God bless, and we'll see you on another Windrush conversation next month. Watch out for the promo material on the BME website, on the BME Facebook page, and on the BME Justice for Lawyers for Justice Twitter. You can tell it's getting late and I'm getting tired. And thank you to MediaNet, our broadcast platform, who's handled bringing people in and out the debate with such consummate ease. My name's Lee Jasper. Good night.